For centuries, the Galactic Council had presided over a galaxy united by a fragile yet stable peace. Countless civilizations had come under its guidance, adhering to its laws and accepting its protection. The Council, composed of the oldest and most advanced species, saw itself as the ultimate authority, shaping galactic order with an unwavering hand. Humanity, relatively new on the interstellar stage, was viewed as insignificant, an emerging species still learning its place. Most galactic citizens barely knew of Earth or its people, and those who did saw humans as an oddity rather than a threat. But while the galaxy was lulled by this sense of calm, humanity was quietly preparing. They had observed the Council's influence, understood its scope, and assessed the limitations of a system that stifled true independence. Humanity's leaders, strategists, and scientists had worked in the shadows, using every resource to advance their technology, military, and intelligence capabilities. They understood that, eventually, they would need to protect their autonomy in a galaxy that offered security only to those who conformed. Humanity's preparations were meticulous, deliberate. They didn't seek to challenge the Council recklessly or out of pride. Instead, their actions were driven by a clear recognition that remaining passive would eventually lead to assimilation or control. And so, they built quietly, forging alliances and developing technology that could stand against even the most advanced forces. They had learned the strengths and weaknesses of their galactic neighbors, and in secret, they devised a strategy that would grant them a fighting chance should the need ever arise. When the time came, humanity struck without warning. Their attacks were swift, targeted, and devastating. Key Council outposts fell in rapid succession, each hit with precise timing. Communication hubs, supply lines, and strategic positions were crippled before the Council could even fully register what was happening. The galaxy, accustomed to humanity's quiet presence, was stunned by the sheer audacity of these initial attacks. For the first time in ages, the Council found itself on the defensive, facing a threat it had never anticipated. As news of humanity's actions spread, confusion turned to disbelief. The Council's analysts scrambled to understand this sudden aggression. They reviewed intelligence reports, searching for signs they might have missed, wondering how humanity, a species once deemed minor, could launch such a coordinated offensive. The reality that they had underestimated Earth's capabilities became painfully clear. Humanity was no longer a mere curiosity. They had emerged as a force capable of disrupting the galactic order. The Council's immediate response was to mobilize its fleet, sending reinforcements to the targeted sectors and positioning their forces to contain the threat. They were confident that sheer numbers and superior technology would quickly subdue the humans. After all, they had brought countless rebellious factions to heel with this approach. But humanity had anticipated this reaction. The Council's movements were predictable, and human strategists exploited every assumption the Council held about warfare. As the Council's fleets advanced, they found themselves facing an enemy that refused to engage in traditional combat. Humanity's forces were elusive, striking suddenly before vanishing into space. Every countermeasure the Council attempted was met with a new, unexpected tactic. Human ships moved with a fluidity that defied the Council's understanding of warfare, adapting to each encounter and refusing to follow any recognizable pattern. For the Council, it was as if they were fighting shadows, an enemy that was everywhere and nowhere at once. The impact of these tactics was profound. Council fleets found themselves stretched thin, forced to cover more ground than they could effectively control. Communication broke down as confusion spread through their ranks. Commanders accustomed to clear-cut engagements were left frustrated, their tactics rendered useless by an adversary who refused to play by the rules. Humanity's approach was not one of brute force but of relentless disruption, designed to keep the Council off balance and drain their resources over time. For humanity, this war was not about conquest but survival and respect. They had no interest in ruling the galaxy or imposing their will on others. Their goal was to establish themselves as a sovereign power, a species capable of defending its autonomy in a galaxy that had underestimated their resolve. And to achieve this, they had to demonstrate that they would not be intimidated by even the mightiest forces. Their strikes were not driven by hatred or revenge, but by a deep understanding of what was at stake. Every attack was a message, a reminder that humanity was not to be dismissed. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as the Council struggled to respond. Civilizations that had long submitted to the Council's authority found themselves questioning the stability of the order they had taken for granted. For the first time, they saw the Council falter, its dominance challenged by a species they had scarcely considered. Humanity's sudden ascent sparked a wave of curiosity and concern, and whispers of admiration began to spread among those who had grown disillusioned with the Council's rule. As humanity's campaign continued, the Council's resolve hardened. They recognized that this was not a rebellion they could simply crush. Humanity was proving to be a formidable adversary, one that required a level of caution and respect they had not initially afforded. Yet, the Council's leaders struggled to reconcile their long-standing perception of humanity with the reality before them. This was not a species driven by recklessness or arrogance. Humanity's actions were calculated, strategic, and unnervingly effective. In their war rooms, Council commanders debated the best course of action, their confidence eroding with each passing day. They had assumed that humanity's attacks would falter under sustained pressure, that Earth would surrender once it realized the extent of the Council's power. But humanity's resolve was unwavering. This was not a desperate attempt to stave off defeat, it was a carefully orchestrated campaign to establish a place in the galaxy that could not be taken from them. The Council was beginning to understand that humanity was a force they could neither predict nor control. The opening moves of humanity's war had shattered the galaxy's illusions. They had shown that peace imposed through dominance was fragile and that a single, determined species could disrupt even the most entrenched powers. Humanity had revealed the Council's vulnerability, and, in doing so, had set the stage for a new era of galactic relations. The message was clear: humanity was here to stay, and they would not be silenced or subdued. The galaxy now faced a choice. They could continue to see humanity as an anomaly to be corrected or recognize them as an equal. The Council's attempts to dismiss Earth had backfired, and now, the galactic order hung in the balance. Humanity's emergence had ignited a spark, one that would challenge the Council's authority and force every civilization to reconsider their place in this vast, unpredictable universe. The Council, stunned by humanity's audacity, quickly moved to retaliate. Determined to end this unexpected resistance, they assembled their most powerful fleets, deploying legions of battle-hardened warriors from the galaxy's finest factions. These forces had seen victory across countless star systems, crushing uprisings with efficiency and speed. Humanity, they assumed, would be no different, a rebellious species to be disciplined and brought under control. Confident in their strategy, the Council's leaders directed their fleets toward Earth, expecting a quick resolution. However, as the fleets advanced, the Council encountered a situation unlike any they had faced. Humanity had anticipated their approach, having studied the Council's tactics and fleet maneuvers meticulously. Instead of traditional defenses, humanity employed tactics that left the Council's commanders confused and frustrated. They launched ambushes and diversionary strikes, pulling Council forces into traps and cutting off supply lines. Every time the Council tried to regroup, humanity seemed one step ahead, their strategy fluid and adaptive, responding to each move with uncanny precision. The Council's forces, trained for direct engagements, found themselves chasing a phantom enemy. Humanity's attacks were swift and strategic, hitting vulnerable points and vanishing before the Council could respond. Council commanders tried to regain control, deploying advanced tracking systems and tighter formations, but humanity exploited even these adjustments. They struck at unexpected angles, forcing the Council to waste time and resources defending positions they once considered secure. The humans were fighting on their own terms, shaping the battlefield to suit their strengths, turning the Council's vast fleets into cumbersome targets. As humanity's tactics unfolded, the Council realized they were dealing with an opponent who saw war through a different lens. For the Council, war was a series of calculated strikes, overwhelming force, and controlled outcomes. But for humanity, it was a game of adaptation, creativity, and resilience. They used every advantage they could, drawing on a collective history of overcoming odds, of surviving through sheer ingenuity. The Council's rigid approach, once an asset, was now a glaring vulnerability. Each time they adjusted their strategy, humanity had already anticipated the shift, countering with a new tactic. The Council's frustration grew. Their fleets were immense, equipped with technology designed to dominate entire planets, yet they found themselves struggling to contain a single species. Resources drained at an alarming rate as the Council's forces were forced to split, regroup, and chase human forces that refused to stand still. Communications became strained as commanders argued over the best course of action. The unity that had once defined the Council's military might began to fracture under the pressure of an enemy they could neither corner nor understand. Back on Earth, humanity's leaders watched the Council's response with calm determination. They knew they couldn't match the Council in sheer numbers or firepower, but they didn't need to. They had planned for this, studying the Council's predictable reliance on overwhelming force. Humanity's approach wasn't about winning individual battles. It was about destabilizing the Council's control and forcing them into a state of constant reaction. With each strike, humanity turned the Council's strength against itself, draining resources and spreading confusion. The Council's commanders, accustomed to victory through dominance, now found themselves in a position they had never anticipated. Humanity's resistance wasn't weakening under pressure. It was growing stronger, more organized, and more relentless. The humans had a knack for exploiting weaknesses, and in the Council's vast, coordinated system, they had found plenty. Humanity struck at critical infrastructure, disrupting supply chains, communication relays, and command centers, leaving the Council's forces increasingly isolated and unable to regroup effectively. In desperation, the Council ordered its fleets to intensify their attacks, hoping that an overwhelming offensive would finally break humanity's defenses. They committed more ships, more soldiers, and more resources, determined to crush the resistance at all costs. Yet, this only played further into humanity's strategy. The more the Council extended its forces, the more vulnerable they became. Humanity's forces picked off isolated units, ambushing smaller fleets, and crippling the Council's ability to coordinate a unified response. Each loss, no matter how small, took a toll on the Council's morale and resources. As weeks passed, the Council's confidence waned. Commanders who had once spoken of a swift victory now questioned the wisdom of their approach. Humanity had not only resisted, they had turned the Council's tactics into liabilities. The Council had misjudged their opponent, assuming that humanity's lack of galactic experience would make them easy to control. Instead, they were facing a species that saw every obstacle as an opportunity to adapt, to learn, and to counter. The Council's leaders began to realize that this conflict was not just about subduing a rebellious species. It was a test of the very principles upon which their authority rested. They had built their power on the belief that superior technology and numbers could ensure control. But humanity's success showed them that adaptability, resilience, and ingenuity could rival even the most powerful empires. Each time the Council attempted to assert its dominance, humanity found a way to undermine it, proving that sheer power alone was not enough. In closed meetings, Council leaders debated their next steps, struggling to reconcile their image of humanity as a minor player with the reality of their strength. Some urged for a full retreat, arguing that continuing this conflict would only weaken the Council's position further. Others, unwilling to admit defeat, pressed for renewed efforts to crush humanity's resistance, viewing any compromise as a threat to the Council's credibility. Humanity's leaders, observing this internal conflict, knew they had struck a critical blow. The Council's forces were divided, both physically and ideologically, weakened by the very structure that had once been their greatest strength. Humanity's success had shaken the foundations of the Council's authority, challenging the notion that galactic peace could be enforced through dominance alone. With each passing day, it became clear that humanity's tactics were not only winning battles but reshaping the Council's understanding of warfare and control. As the Council grappled with this unexpected reality, humanity's resilience continued to hold, proving that a species need not be the strongest or most advanced to stand as equals. They had shown the galaxy that strength could be found in adaptability, that a willingness to fight for independence could shake even the most entrenched powers. And with every skirmish, every victory, humanity's place in the galaxy grew stronger, leaving the Council to confront a truth they had long refused to see. The Council's leaders, faced with humanity's unyielding resistance, found themselves contemplating options that would have been unthinkable only weeks earlier. The initial confidence in their strategy had crumbled under the weight of humanity's relentless tactics. Humanity's approach was unlike anything they had encountered before, an adaptable force that seemed to anticipate their every move, and it was driving the Council's forces to exhaustion. Resources were dwindling, morale was fractured, and the unity that once defined the Council's authority had become tenuous. Humanity had forced them into a position where retreat or escalation seemed to be the only options left. Desperation led the Council to deploy their most advanced weaponry, technology reserved for only the direst of threats. They hoped these measures would shock humanity into submission, demonstrating once and for all the overwhelming power the Council wielded. Yet humanity's response was not fear or retreat, it was persistence. Each display of force was met with even more ingenious countermeasures, as humanity adapted to the escalating threats. They learned from every encounter, repurposing tactics, adjusting defenses, and refusing to allow the Council any advantage. This persistence unnerved the Council's leaders, who had come to rely on fear as a means of control. Humanity was breaking the established pattern, refusing to submit or be intimidated. For every new weapon the Council deployed, humanity found a way to neutralize its impact. And with each counter, humanity seemed to gain momentum, growing more confident in their abilities and more determined in their cause. The Council, unused to prolonged resistance, struggled to comprehend how this young species had managed to withstand their might for so long. Amidst this growing tension, the Council's internal structure began to unravel. Factions formed within their ranks, with some leaders advocating for a complete withdrawal, recognizing that continuing the fight would only weaken their influence and tarnish their reputation. Others, unwilling to concede, argued for a final offensive, insisting that surrender would undermine the authority the Council had spent millennia establishing. This division created a rift that weakened their once unified front, leaving the Council increasingly vulnerable to humanity's attacks. Humanity's leaders observed these fractures with calculated patience. They understood that the Council's internal discord was as much an opportunity as any tactical advantage. Rather than pressing for immediate, decisive victories, humanity employed a strategy designed to amplify the Council's disunity, targeting critical outposts and supply lines that forced the Council to make difficult choices. Each strike exacerbated the divisions among the Council's leaders, forcing them to confront the possibility that they were fighting a losing battle. The psychological strain on the Council was palpable. Commanders who had once dismissed humanity as a minor threat now struggled with the realization that they were up against a species as tenacious as any they had encountered. Humanity's persistence had shattered the illusion of the Council's invincibility, revealing vulnerabilities that had long been hidden beneath layers of dominance and control. As these cracks widened, the Council's leaders were forced to confront a truth they had been reluctant to acknowledge. Humanity's resistance was not an anomaly but a testament to their resilience. The Council's attempts to re-establish control grew increasingly desperate. They sent reinforcements to key locations, bolstered their defenses, and issued decrees intended to reinforce loyalty among their ranks. But these measures only highlighted their own insecurity. Humanity continued to adapt, using intelligence and creativity to bypass the Council's defenses and launch coordinated strikes that inflicted significant damage. With each attack, humanity sent a clear message that they would not yield, that their determination was stronger than any force the Council could bring to bear. This persistence forced the Council to reconsider its assumptions about power and control. Humanity had shown them that strength was not defined solely by technological superiority or numbers but by the ability to persevere under unimaginable odds. In a galaxy where authority had long been established through dominance, humanity was proving that resilience and ingenuity could be equally powerful. The Council's leaders, accustomed to compliance, were beginning to understand that humanity's will to fight was rooted in something deeper than mere survival. It was a fight for autonomy, for a place in the galaxy where they could stand as equals. With the Council's forces stretched thin and morale at an all-time low, humanity seized the opportunity to press forward. They targeted critical command centers and infrastructure, further undermining the Council's ability to coordinate a cohesive defense. These attacks were precise and calculated, designed to inflict maximum disruption with minimal resources. The Council, already struggling to maintain order, found themselves unable to respond effectively. Each successful strike added to humanity's momentum, emboldening them to push even harder against the Council's weakening defenses. Humanity's strategy was not just about winning battles but about reshaping the dynamics of the conflict. By refusing to engage in direct, conventional warfare, they had forced the Council to fight on unfamiliar terms, challenging the very principles that had sustained their rule. The Council's leaders, for the first time, began to question the viability of their approach. Humanity had shown them that brute force was not the answer, that adaptability and resilience could overcome even the most formidable obstacles. As the Council's resources dwindled and their forces continued to suffer losses, the realization of their impending defeat became undeniable. Humanity had not only withstood the Council's might but had turned their own tactics against them, dismantling the foundation of their power. The Council, once so confident in their supremacy, now faced the sobering reality that they had been outmatched by a species they had deemed insignificant. The final blow to the Council's morale came not from a massive battle but from the growing awareness that humanity had fundamentally altered the balance of power. They had proven that no species, regardless of its youth or experience, should be underestimated. Humanity's resilience had exposed the limits of the Council's authority, leaving them with no choice but to acknowledge the strength of their adversary. The galaxy, once unified under the Council's rule, now watched as a new power emerged, one that had defied every expectation and shattered the illusion of the Council's invulnerability. As the Council's leaders grappled with this new reality, they faced a decision that would define the future of galactic order. Humanity had not sought to conquer but to assert their right to exist without subjugation. They had shown that they were more than capable of standing their ground, of defending their place in the galaxy. And in doing so, they had forced the Council to reconsider the very foundations of their rule, challenging them to recognize that strength was not solely defined by dominance but by the will to resist. The Council's leaders, battered by a relentless series of strategic blows, finally came to terms with a reality they had long ignored. Humanity had demonstrated that power was not solely a matter of technology or numbers but of sheer resilience and adaptability. The Council's forces, once the very embodiment of galactic dominance, were now a weakened shadow of their former might, stretched thin and increasingly demoralized. Their conventional strategies had proven ineffective, and their reliance on brute force had left them vulnerable to an enemy that refused to conform to traditional warfare. As humanity's campaign advanced, it became evident that this conflict was more than just a battle over territory or influence. It was a challenge to the Council's authority itself. Humanity's defiance was a direct affront to the very foundation of the Council's rule, revealing flaws in a system that had grown complacent in its belief of unshakable supremacy. For millennia, the Council had governed with an unyielding hand, confident that no single species would ever dare to question their position. But now, humanity had shown the galaxy that even the oldest and most powerful institutions were not immune to challenge. Under increasing pressure and with few viable options left, factions within the Council began advocating for a truce. The idea of conceding to humanity was met with fierce resistance from those who believed that any compromise would be an admission of weakness. But as the losses continued to mount, even the most stubborn leaders could no longer deny the futility of further escalation. The Council was faced with a choice: continue a conflict that risked unraveling their authority, or acknowledge that humanity was an adversary they could not simply crush. In these final stages, the Council's resolve wavered. Humanity's relentless pressure had forced them to confront the limits of their power and the cost of maintaining a war they had once deemed unwinnable for their opponent. The Council's resources were exhausted, and their forces had been whittled down to a fraction of their original strength. Morale within their ranks was at an all-time low, as soldiers and commanders alike questioned the purpose of a campaign that seemed destined for failure. The Council had sought to break humanity's spirit, but instead, they had found their own resilience tested. Humanity, sensing the Council's weakening resolve, pushed forward with a calculated final assault. They did not need to obliterate the Council's remaining forces. Their objective was to secure recognition and autonomy, not to impose dominance. By focusing on key strategic locations and maintaining pressure on supply lines, humanity ensured that the Council would be unable to regroup or reinforce. This methodical approach underscored humanity's intent. They sought not conquest but respect. Their message was clear: they demanded their right to exist and thrive, unbound by the Council's control. In a last-ditch effort to preserve their authority, the Council's leaders initiated diplomatic discussions, offering terms that they hoped would retain some semblance of their influence. Humanity, however, approached these negotiations with clarity and resolve, making it clear that they would accept nothing less than full recognition as a sovereign force within the galaxy. They had proven their capacity to stand against the Council's might, and they were not interested in partial measures or hollow concessions. Humanity's terms were simple: they sought equality, not subjugation. As the talks progressed, the Council came to understand that they could no longer dictate terms from a position of unquestioned power. Humanity had leveled the playing field, forcing the Council to negotiate as equals rather than rulers. This shift in dynamics was unprecedented. For the first time in its long history, the Council faced an adversary who had not only defied them but had also survived their attempts at suppression. The Council's leaders, humbled and wary, were left with no choice but to accept that humanity's place in the galaxy was now secure. The formal agreement that emerged from these negotiations marked a turning point for the galaxy. Humanity was granted recognition as an independent power, free from the oversight and intervention of the Council. This was more than just a political victory. It was a validation of humanity's strength and determination. The galaxy took note, witnessing a moment that defied centuries of established order. Humanity's resilience had shattered the illusion that the Council's rule was absolute, proving that even the mightiest institutions could be challenged. In the aftermath, the galaxy's perception of humanity was forever changed. Once dismissed as an emerging species of little consequence, humanity was now seen as a force to be reckoned with, a species capable of standing on its own against the most powerful coalition of civilizations. Other species, many of whom had chafed under the Council's authority, viewed humanity's victory with a mixture of awe and inspiration. The idea of independence, once thought impossible, now seemed within reach for those willing to follow humanity's example. The Council, meanwhile, faced a period of intense introspection. Humanity's success had exposed vulnerabilities within their organization, weaknesses they could no longer ignore. The Council's leaders understood that their authority would never be the same. They could no longer rely solely on power and intimidation to maintain control. Humanity had introduced a new paradigm, one where respect and recognition were as important as force. The Council, having witnessed the limits of its own influence, began to reconsider its role within the galaxy. For humanity, this hard-won victory was not an endpoint but a beginning. They had earned their place as equals among the galaxy's civilizations, but they understood that this status came with responsibility. They had challenged the galaxy's most powerful entity and succeeded, but they had no desire to replace the Council's dominance with their own. Humanity's leaders were committed to building a future based on cooperation and mutual respect, offering a different path for the galaxy's civilizations to follow. The legacy of this conflict would shape the galaxy for generations to come. Humanity's resilience had proven that no force, however powerful, could suppress the will of a people determined to live on their own terms. They had redefined what it meant to be powerful, demonstrating that strength lay not in domination but in the courage to stand firm against impossible odds. The Council's defeat was a lesson to all. The age of unquestioned rule was over, and a new era, one of autonomy and equality, had begun. As humanity moved forward, they remained mindful of the struggle that had brought them to this point. Their victory was a reminder of their own resilience, a testament to their unbreakable spirit. And as they looked to the future, they were prepared to meet whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that they had earned their place in the galaxy. Humanity had risen from obscurity to prominence, not through conquest but through an unwavering commitment to their own values. In doing so, they had secured a legacy that would resonate throughout the stars, a legacy of resilience, courage, and the indomitable will to be free.